Ron Wiener came to Belfast as a sort of academic, a sociologist of some sort, to do some study. I suppose you would call it action research. But he got involved in the Shankill with the whole redevelopment process, and it was just as he was leaving that actually I became actively involved in the Shankill, being from there, and our paths crossed for about 6 months. So he left me quite a legacy because he had done about 3 years of work, and really a lot of the success we had later with the Save the Shankill campaign was down to his preparatory work.
The book was important, I think, for probably two particular reasons. The one, that you're giving something back to the people. So in a sense, here's your story. It was actually used quite a lot on the road, by the people on the road and by the paramilitaries, to actually begin thinking and to get some understanding of what had happened. And also I think that any time you do a particular bit of work anywhere, it also has a generalisable effect, so that people who are doing similar campaigns or similar issues in other parts of the country can learn something from it.
In the 1970s, Belfast was going through traumatic change. You would call it traumatic change. You had the collapse of old industrial Belfast, the shipyard going, Mackey's declining, the rope works and Sirocco works, all those old industries collapsing basically. Then you had massive redevelopment plans for the whole of inner Belfast 50 years after it should have been done originally, and basically a roads-based plan which was driving roads, motorways through Belfast, 3 ring roads planned to encircle the city, and whole communities then being wiped away by the bulldozer. Places like the docks went completely, dockland, but the Shankill itself, largest single redevelopment area in Belfast, big Weetabix flats planned for it, tearing apart the whole community as it had operated for over 100 years.
Part of all of the action in the 70s was how did you actually stop or slow down the rate of redevelopment so that you actually had a chance to put forward alternative plans, and then how did you find the political muscle, if you like, to try to get those alternative plans into place.
All this bad stuff, the flats and stuff in the lower part of the road here in the Shankill happened before the Save the Shankill campaign came into existence, and were planned from the mid-60s on and developed by the Belfast Corporation. So it was actually the old original fur coat unionist party in the City Hall that planned for these flats, and I remember one of the councillors at the time, Billy Kennedy, looking over at Divis Flats there, that's the remaining block, and saying, if them Tags can get flats, we want flats too. So we ended up with flats just because Divis got flats. People got jealous. This is a site that an investor or developer has bought and aims to build apartments on. There are either being built now or planned and got planning permission to be built something like 1,500 apartments in the Greater Shankill. They're fancy names, the apartments, fancy names for what we used to call flats. And people are now that are resisting them are calling flats. The Lower Shankill estate was one of the worst planned places ever in Belfast or anywhere else, and it always had the seeds of its own destruction built into it. It is now a place that has gone very badly downhill because people didn't want to live there. It also became the centre point of a feud back in 2000 and beyond in terms of paramilitary organisations, and things just went completely spiralling out of control, and large numbers of people got forced out of their homes in Lower Shankill to move elsewhere. So the whole place has sort of fallen apart. And I think, Ron, one of the things we were talking about when you came back today and yesterday is that the strength of community action like the Save the Shankill campaign was that it could stop things happening, it could stop the flats being built. The difficulty is making something positive happen. So I dare say the community can possibly stop these apartments happening if in fact the worldwide economic collapse or whatever's happening doesn't stop them anyway. But actually getting something else happening on that site is another question.
If people want social housing, why isn't there a deal with the developers which actually says we'll do you posh apartments in part? The quid pro quo is you're going to have to put in X amount of social housing. You're using your political whatever muscle you have to strike some sort of negotiated deal.
Yeah. And I think that's what people need to understand, because you need to be sophisticated about this. It's not just a matter of saying no, it's a matter of getting the best deal possible on the day, you know.
Can I just say something? Is that not quite bizarre? Facing onto the bottom of the Shankill Road, we've got a bungalow and a small single-story Kentucky Fried Chicken. You know, like visually, it's isn't it?
It's sort of totally incongruous, isn't it?
Kentucky Fried Chicken was the first inward investment that Shankill had in 35 years. It was the first international investment. And I remember when it was coming in, we were actually quite pleased because it was the first people ever going to build anything in the place. But there was people got out of their beds around there when they were laying the foundation stone for it and come out on a protest saying we want community, not chickens. That's it. So over here, we'll come to it later on, but in here, I don't know if you remember, this was phase 1 of redevelopment area 12 and 13 as it was called then.
Right.
And there were to be 9 blocks of flats in here, 4-story blocks of flats. This is what we called Percy Street at the time, if you remember.
Yeah.
And it's now Percy Street, Loudon Street and Wigton Street, no streets. And this was the first big victory we had, because I remember you, me and Claire Curry sitting down with the planners, Harding MacDonald at the time, and he was building these 9 blocks of flats, and we said people won't want them. And he said, well, you see the houses they lived in for the last 120 years, they weren't used to them when they moved in, so they'll get used to the flats. But this is where we brought Queen's Town and Country Planning, Professor Moten at the time in, and we got the original plans for the 9 blocks of flats here and drew them. Got the same numbers of people back, actually.
I remember that.
Yeah. And our alternative plans got built. Now, if we were doing it now, we would make these even better. But this was the first victory of the Save the Shankill campaign, these terraced houses back instead of 9 blocks of flats.
I think it's really important that people realise that the initial plan was for flats and all over the place.
The whole way up the front of the Shankill. There was to be no shops except for a district centre for shopping.
Yeah. So even though there's been lots of losses in some senses, it's really important to realise that the Shankill campaign actually achieved quite a lot in terms of what it was able to stop happening.
One of the elements of success at that point was getting outside professional expertise in to assist at that point from Queen's University Planning Department, who were able to, at our instruction, draw alternative plans. And that gave us a negotiating base to say to the housing executive, you say you have to do this for X reasons, here we can show you what the people want. And actually they ended up getting built.
I felt continually the communities were sort of fighting a reactive thing all the time. There were plans being drawn up. And you were talking about the donut circle. And so part of my thinking when I was reflecting on it this morning was thinking, why wasn't there, and it might exist for all I know, something like almost like a people's plan for the donut area?
Yeah, I think you're right, because while we go out and work with communities, we work with Jackie and the Shankill, Ligoneel, Donegal Pass and so on, there is a need for a more strategic view.
Yeah.
Now, we do have a strategic plan for Belfast called BMAP in its draft form, and we all are sort of working within that frame. But yes, an alternative strategic plan that would try and capture in some sort of way the needs of all the communities across, particularly in inner city, but Belfast, around the periphery, around the edge of the city, in some sort of way, and then let local people work on the detail of that at a local level.
We've still got the legacy of bad redevelopment from 35 years ago. As we move further up, you'll see better stuff. What I wanted to show you is this is the remaining masonettes, the only remaining ones. You can see they put a sign up for you, save our Shankill. And this is a protest about the apartments.
Right.
And these are the housing executive.
Right.
offices here which are shortly to move. There's a health centre going in here. But one of the good news is across the road here, this is one of our projects, Ron, for the Greater Shankill Partnership that I work for now. And this is our early years project. We basically did an analysis 15 years ago to say that our major problem on the Shankill was educational underachievement, which is worse than any other area of Belfast by a mile. It's worse. And when we analysed it, we said, look, the earlier we can intervene here, the better. And we set up an early years project, which was local people who had parenting experiences, being trained to work in a parenting support service with people who had young babies, based on the notion that what happens to a child in the first 3 years of its life is the most critical 3 years. Yeah. And it's now turned into a Shankill Sure Start. What we're trying to do is say we're going to take one new generation of Shankill children and advantage that generation rather than having disadvantage. But it's like an 18-year cycle. Yeah. We will not see the benefits of this in 3 years. You know, we've been at it 6 years already. And of course we do see some benefits, but then you get big rocks rolling down the hill knocking you back, like the feuds that there's been in the last 7 years, the paramilitary feuds, which, you know, causes stress and a vast increase. A lot of the gains you make get wiped away by circumstances. But it's been a brilliant project. This is the leisure centre over here that you remember planned. This leisure centre was to be built, the district centre for leisure. Yes. And then on this side from here up was to be the district shopping centre. The Shankill was to be an official 4-lane road. Yeah. There was going to be a footbridge, if you remember, from the leisure centre over to the district shopping centre in the original plans. Everybody was going to drive here, park their cars. Yep. You took your kids into the leisure centre while the wife went shopping in the district centre for shopping over the road bridge. I can remember that we did all the sums of money about how this place wouldn't be affordable for people. I think the leisure centres in Belfast are losing the City Council £45 million a year as we talk. But again, this was all things we actually said 35 years ago about what would actually happen. Yeah. And it's interesting, as we were saying, that this discussion is happening all across the UK at the moment. The one about sort of district shopping centres, big malls, versus corner shops, small shops and things like this, and about how in fact the big malls drive out all and sundry and near them. Yeah. And this block that we're coming up to here are among the first apartments that are actually being built on the Shankill, called Leslie Central. I don't know where that name comes. You can see the prices are from £140,000 each. Well within the income of most of the people who live on the Well, they've actually dropped dramatically. These were marketed first at £175,000 each. But as you can see, I mean, it's a brick wall, it's flats. Yeah. You're talking about 4-storey flats. Who's going to buy them? I do not know. You mean you could market them to say you have a leisure centre within 20 yards, you have the city centre within a quarter of a mile. You have shopping right outside the door. You could do a marketing job on it, but I don't know who's going to live here. And I certainly don't know who from the Shankill is going to buy them. This little scheme's a recent one. You can see the shop frontages. We've got them done up. We got some money from the City Council to do up some of the shop fronts to make them look a bit better. You could almost mark this as about the point at which the Save the Shankill campaign started, and you can see and you can feel that there's more of a thing happening here. One of the things about the whole community action stuff is to make judgments all the time. Yeah. You can't continually over 35 years run against the grain of what's happening and hope that you can't take on the world. Oh, I know. You know? And I mean, I think when we were starting it, part of it was nostalgic in a sense. That part of the vision was to try to retain what actually existed, rather. And even though there was an awareness of these sort of economic forces and political forces which were pushing the destruction of places like the Shankill, from the people's point of view,
there was an attempt to try to save as much of this way of life as possible.
Well, there was, and we did, because this is still here.
Yeah.
And when I say it's vibrant, there's still people on it.
Yeah.
It's still being used.
Yeah.
The shops, you know, people don't come from outside largely to shop here. Yeah. Although, interestingly, the day the Shankill bomb went off in October 1993, when 10 people were killed, including the bomber, of the 52 people who were injured in that bomb,
yes,
half of them were from outside the Shankill that day, back visiting relatives, shopping on the road. Now that's like a snapshot at that moment in time in 1993. So there are still people coming back, but largely these shops are dependent on the disposable income in this area, which isn't great.
Yeah.
This is the site here in the road where we put the chairs out in 1974 and put our first photo exhibition up. Yeah, just where we're standing here. I told you last night it was the 4th of May, 1974. Liverpool were playing Newcastle in the FA Cup final. Liverpool won 4-0. That's a Manchester United supporter saying that, by the way. This is really the heart now of the Shankill Road shopping. And experts that have looked at this have said if you were doing the right thing and being brutal, you would lose the shops at the top. We've already lost them at the bottom, and concentrate things, because a mile-long linear route here, ribbon shopping, is too much to be sustained. But that's tough, that sort of prioritisation, you know. Over here, Ron, you'll see another community development that we did. The sign's broken a bit. Argyle Business Centre, down in there, side of an old school. And that's been developed as office space and workshops for small businesses. Funded by government. We built this in 1990, and it's full now, has gone into phase 2 of its development. And it's an attempt to retain some local employment and encourage entrepreneurs to grow their own businesses. So there's a number of enterprise centres about which have been relatively successful. So I think the point is that we've managed to hold, like almost, what have we succeeded in? We've kept, the Shankill exists, that's the first thing, that's a big success, because there was a danger it could have been knocked out of existence altogether. We've hung on in. There is a certain quality of life here. It's been damaged partly by ourselves, largely by the government, but, you know, we're still here. When we were involved here with redevelopment in the early 70s, we were largely dealing, and our focus was on a physical thing, and it had to be, because there was a bulldozer at the end of people's street, and it was, I don't remember us discussing really the quality of education at that time, or what quality of training was going on, or issues about employment. Now, of course, people were still working in the shipyards then, and Mackey's was still in existence to a degree and stuff, although they were running down. Now, when we talk about regeneration, the physical side of it, this is important, is only one aspect of that. Or if you ask me what's the main thing we should be focusing on and are focusing on the Shankill, it's educational disadvantage and making sure that kids are getting a good chance here. It's about the environment, it's about quality training, it's about access to that mountain, it's about a whole range of things that make up people's lives, about the level of ill health and good health. It's about sport and how people celebrate their lives. It's not just about housing. It is about shopping. It's not just about shopping. It's about the whole of life. And that's a big change, I think. And back in the 70s, the physical stuff was forced on us.
I mean, the bit about the quality of life that was around was the bit about the way of the close-knit community, if you like. That was the thing that gave the quality of life then.
But the other thing was that people moved out to try to find that. You know, this aspiration, or that's the dream. The dream. They moved. Yeah, exactly. You know, to try to find this, what they thought, this quality of life in our suburbia. You know, and now, I mean, with every morning we hear traffic jams coming into Belfast. I mean, what quality of life people in Belfast, sitting for an hour in traffic, getting in, and that thing about living back in the city, I think people want it again.
I mean, one of the issues I think, Jackie, you referred to before was not just about the inappropriate design for the Shankill, the wholesale redevelopment that was proposed, the impact of the motorway and so on, but also a broader strategic attempt to decant people out of the Shankill and places like the Shankill out to places like Craigavon and the new towns and so on to support the new industries there. So there were two things happening at once. The Shankill was losing its population, partly through redevelopment, but partly through the government wanting people to move out to other places to support the new industries.
That failed completely. But by the time people discovered it failed, you had what you're calling the donut effect of a big hole in the centre. And now people are saying, let's get people back into the city, into the centre of cities. They're saying that throughout the British Isles. We've still got a community here, that needs to grow. But
Jackie, what was you often quote the figure, the population decline. What was it overall?
Population of Greater Shankill fell from the late 50s, it was at 76,000 people, to presently, depending on how you define the area, 24,000 people.
That's very
24.
significant.
50,000 people got moved out or moved out.
But that's significant too in terms of supporting local services. Once that population goes into decline, it's steadied up now, but the number of services available that are viable in a sense, reduced somewhat.
And even up to 1990, we were arguing that you needed the build for people to come back here. That's not gonna happen now. But what you need to do is see what's sustainable in this community and make it grow, and that's really it. If you don't get back the old days, you have to look to the future. And for us in the community, that's a big challenge because it means change, and it means recognising where change is happening and making the most of it at the time, and it's a different sort of challenge to just saying no, we're not having flats or
but it goes back to your point, Ron, that you were making, and that is about the sense of loss of control. We currently have the way we plan for Belfast at the moment is we set out a broad strategic plan for the city and then leave it to the market to deliver, and local people don't have any control over those processes. There's no opportunity, if you like, to factor in what people want at a local level, or indeed to plan at a local level around the sort of issues that are important.
And what's wrong with that? And if there are planners ever listening to this, what they need to know, or decision makers, is that market will always pass the Shankill by, places like the Shankill by, until it has exhausted everywhere else, and then it'll come up here and pick up the bits and pieces. This is the actual site of the Shankill bomb, or what's known as the Shankill bomb, and 23rd of October 1993 at 1:05 in the afternoon, Saturday afternoon, the IRA came, planted a no-warning bomb here, and there were 10 people killed. 9 of them were people out shopping, children, their parents and so forth, and one of the bombers was killed with his own bomb, which was a devastating, obviously, experience in this community, and actually, in a way, was led to the peace process getting a move on, because it was in 1994 then, just under a year later, that the paramilitary ceasefires were declared. So this was one of the last awful gasps of the troubles that happened here. And across the street, just beyond that, buses, a memorial park which is to commemorate those that were killed here and all the other victims of the troubles as well. And you would get people on anniversaries laying wreaths there and commemoration and stuff. But it was an awful day in the history of the Shankill. It's had its difficulties over the last 9 years since it was built, because you get the money to actually build it, but to run it, and these things...
Nobody wants to give you money for that.
That's what we were talking about. They're not sustainable on their own, so... but we're running it, and we're getting there now, and it's big. Of course, the shops and offices were meant to be where the income came from along the side, but you're still charging the same rent as everybody else, so if it was downtown, you'd be all right. Up here, it's a different story, But it's a big centre that's quite exciting.
Thank you. You
have not changed one bit, my friend. How are you?
Really lovely to see you.
And you. When are we going to do?
And fantastic that you're still actively involved after all of these
years. When are you going to do part 2 of the Rape and Plunder of Shankill?
It depends how much there is left to do to rape and plunder.
There's not left to plunder.
You are the longest serving councillor by a mile. He's the father of the house in the City Hall.
Right. You must have seen so many changes in the time, and economically and politically, and
But I'm sure you would see, terrific changes. I mean, one of the good things that came out of your visit was that, if you remember, when we started, they were built in the old blocks of
yeah,
flats, weeda box as we called them.
Yeah.
And even the housing was horrible.
Yeah,
Now, if you look, whilst there's still an awful lot to be done, but if you look at the modern housing that we have, I mean, if you go into any of those streets, I mean, they're beautiful houses. You wouldn't know a difference between the private and the public houses, which is the way it should be. So
absolutely.
through your efforts, I believe that we got a better standard of house, and even yet we're fighting to improve upon that. But I think that there's many good things that have come out of it, you know, and I think the book itself, The Rape and the Plunder, the Shankill, it made people think. Even governments, I believe, had changed their mind, because at one time, Jack, do you remember when they were built in mid-Shankill, they actually talked about needing to provide 2 car park spaces per house, and at that time nobody had a car on the Shankill Road, but they wanted you. So it was all a matter of trying to eat as much up land and build less houses. But you know what we've got, I'm happy with the part that, you know, that we were able to take on from your lead.
Right.
One of the things that your book did, The Rape and Plunder of the Shankill, was it gave credibility to our case, if you know what I mean. Because we were doing the Shankill Bulletin, but people would say, well, they would say that when we do the Shankill Bulletin, you know, it's them. But because you brought some credibility to it and had a doctor in front of your name and this sort of thing, you know, they said, oh, here, this is serious. And now your book is on every planning course nearly everywhere, and you know, it's not like old hat, because it's happening all over again. But it actually gave us a base and got us taken more seriously than might have been the case.
I mean, I don't think for one moment that we would have ever been able to move them away from the old type of stuff that they were building. I think, in fact, that at that stage, the stuff that they built down there, the Weetabix blocks, they were actually due to build them right up to Crimea Street on one side and Canmore on the other, which meant that all the shops would have been disappearing, and just as basically a few houses in behind it, and they were the old type houses. So I think it, you know, as Jackie rightly said, it with you coming in, I believe that if we had tried, that would have been unsuccessful. But again, that through your efforts, we're able to achieve quite a lot.
The most useful thing about being a doctor, I discovered, was that when there was somebody in really bad housing conditions, you could phone up housing, and you could say, "This is Dr. Wiener here," and they would never question what sort of doctor you were. And you could say, "I'm really worried about so and so's health."
I used to ring up the guest you Smith that just hung up.
I think the problem is the scale of what's happening, that every bit of vacant land, there's a bit right behind us, there's a bit across the street, is being handed over by government to developers without any constraint on them. And I think what we need to do is to be grown up enough and sophisticated enough to force the government to put constraints on the developers and say, if you're going to do that, you're also going to do this. The first private houses that were ever built for sale in this community since redevelopment were built just up that street in Tennant Street. Now, we fought to get them built, those houses, and Hugh Smith had a vital role in doing it. Now, the developer that did them, and it was our first dealings with a developer, actually wanted to build an old people's home and walk away, because that's what he made his money off. And what we did was a deal where Hugh was able to block stuff from the City Hall and Planning Department to block planning permission, where the Health Trust were saying, we won't buy your beds in this home unless you do a deal with the community. And what the developer did was built this house that he was making the money off, but built 12 houses for sale. He set up a press conference to sell the beds in the old people's home, and before he walked out, he had the 12 houses sold. Now, that was the first time we made a breakthrough. So you can be sophisticated enough if you apply the pressure in the right way, not just to say no. We've done that, we've been through that, but to say, here's the deal, and here's the deal for the benefit of the community.
But whether anything has really changed for the better of the people of this road after all those years, mind you, you know, bricks and mortar maybe, but the people's needs are still very much similar now as to what they were all those years ago.
Yeah.
The legacy that redevelopment has left in the Shankill is a desperate situation. Basically, the awful planning, the sort of archetypal 60s planning, we've got the results of it now. And you know, an estate like Lower Shankill just doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's almost decimated now. The flats are down, and we're left with a massively reduced population, 76,000 reduced to 26,000 people. We're left with an ageing population, and we're left with a rump of a working class community. But nevertheless, a community that still has life in it and that is determined to regenerate itself.
I think some of the visions we had were actually saying that when we saw the motorway just now, earlier on, we said this is exactly what would happen. It would destroy communities, and the alternative vision that we had is exactly, this is 35 years ago, the vision that people are actually having now, which is to say we were talking about public transport as against cars being the basis of moving around the city, about neighbourhood access bus schemes, communal cooperative sharing schemes, all of these sorts of things. So we had a vision 35 years ago, which are just beginning to be realised in different cities around the country now. So there's something about why wasn't Belfast in a position to be able to hear things then, you know, and is it in a position to be able to hear things now? Parts of the country can learn something from it.
In the 1970s, Belfast was going through traumatic change, you would call it traumatic change. You had the collapse of old industrial Belfast, the shipyard going, Mackey's declining, the rope works and Sirocco works, all those old industries collapsing basically. Then you had massive redevelopment plans for the whole of inner Belfast, 50 years after it should have been done originally, and basically a roads-based plan which was driving roads, motorways, through Belfast, 3 ring roads planned to encircle the city, and whole communities then being wiped away by the bulldozer. Places like the docks went completely, dockland, but the Shankill itself, largest single redevelopment area in Belfast, big Weetabix flats planned for it, tearing apart the whole community as it had operated for over 100 years.
Part of all of the action in the 70s was how did you actually stop or slow down the rate of...
I got forced out of their homes in Lower Shankill to move elsewhere. So the whole place has sort of fallen apart. And I think, Ron, one of the things we were talking about when you came back today and yesterday is that the strength of community action like the Save the Shankill campaign was that it could stop things happening. It could stop the flats being built. The difficulty is making something positive happen. So I dare say the community can possibly stop these apartments happening if in fact the worldwide economic collapse or whatever's happening doesn't stop them anyway. But actually getting something else happening on that site is another question.
If people want social housing, why isn't there a deal with the developers which actually says we'll do you posh apartments in part? The quid pro quo is you're going to have to put in X amount of social housing. You're using your political whatever muscle you have to strike some sort of negotiated deal.
Yeah. And I think that's what people need to understand, because you need to be sophisticated about this. It's not just a matter of saying no, it's a matter of getting the best deal possible on the day, you know.
Can I just say something? Is that not quite bizarre? Facing onto the bottom of Shankill Road, we've got a bungalow.
Redevelopment, so that you actually had a chance to put forward alternative plans. And then how did you find the political muscle, if you like, to try to get those alternative plans into place?
All this bad stuff, the flats and stuff in the lower part of the road here in the Shankill happened before the Save the Shankill campaign came into existence, and were planned from the mid-60s on and developed by the Belfast Corporation. So it was actually the old original fur coat unionist party in the City Hall that planned for these flats, and I remember one of the councillors at the time, Billy Kennedy, looking over at Davis Flats there, that's the remaining block, and saying, if them Taigs can get flats, we want flats too. So we ended up with flats just because Davis got flats. People got jealous. Ron Wiener came to Belfast as a sort of academic, a sociologist of some sort, to do some study. I suppose you would call it action research. But he got involved in the Shankill with the whole redevelopment process, and it was just as he was leaving that actually I became actively involved in the Shankill, being from there, and our paths crossed for about 6 months. So he left me quite a legacy because he had done about 3 years of work, and really a lot of the success we had later with the Save the Shankill campaign was down to his preparatory work.
The book was important, I think, for probably two particular reasons. The one, that you're giving something back to the people. So in a sense, here's your story. It was actually used quite a lot on the road, by the people on the road and by the paramilitaries, to actually begin thinking and to get some understanding of what had happened. And also I think that any time you do a particular bit of work anywhere, it also has a generalisable effect, so that people who are doing similar campaigns or similar issues in other...
This is a site that an investor or developer has bought and aims to build apartments on. There are either being built now or planned and got planning permission to be built something like 1,500 apartments in the Greater Shankill. They're fancy names, the apartments, fancy names for what we used to call flats.
Yeah.
And people are now that are resisting them are calling flats. The Lower Shankill estate was one of the worst planned places ever in Belfast or anywhere else, and it always had the seeds of its own destruction built into it. It is now a place that has gone very badly downhill because people didn't want to live there. It also became the centre point of a feud back in 2000 and beyond in terms of paramilitary organisations, and things just went completely spiralling out of control, and large numbers of people